Kia ora, thank you. Yes, I do have biological roots, and my professional background is in ecologies, and with reference to something said much earlier today, I started life milking cows, so that probably cripples me. I really want to focus in some areas similar to May, but I couldn't possibly go into that area which I get quite frightened about, public law, which we apparently all do. I really want to stay in the biological interface between us as a people and our space and our place in the world, and Paul Callaghan has already talked about this. 4 things to sort of frame that, and I'll come back to these montage pictures, is I start with we are a democracy. We're a reasonably robust democracy, and what May said about our short term, totally agree with, and many of us are talking about it. Democracies worldwide and dictatorships are evolving really fast, and that butts up against a whole lot of the areas of biology I want to talk about. Second thing is we're still currently a biological economy. You've heard a lot about that already this morning, but that is where we're framed. It's where we've spent the last 200 or 300 years evolving from. We're still deeply there, and yes, it is extremely challenging. And yes, it is part of us in the sense that we are very protective of that broader ecology, which is our underpinning. Hence one of my pictures there, which is the march against mining proposals on Class 4 land. So it does define us. We're very, very strong when it comes to mucking with the integrity of and beauty of which is part of us. Why, in fact, we like living here. Why, in fact, it would appear we're prepared to work for such low wages to live in paradise. So that takes me to the tensions that are building up worldwide, and that is both here and internationally. We are, as we've already heard this morning, pushing up against many limits. And the limits that scare me witless are those that are around the interface between food and water becomes food. And it was really highlighted to myself and my wife Pam last year when we were invited to a Food Futures Forum in Iceland, of all places. A group of only 50 or 60 people brought together from the north and the south with very different perspectives on how we shape our food futures. And it was brutally scary. If you thought Dennis was scary, try looking into the food security of the planet, and it gets very scary. And that actually is an underpinning of the sort of thing that's gone on in Egypt and part of the Middle East. It's being seen as an uprising against dictatorships, and it is that, but there's big tensions there in access to basic things like water and food, and that was certainly part of what was going on in Egypt, another one of my pictures. So the fourth thing is that New Zealand's evolution, New Zealand's future is still going to be shaped in many, many ways by our biologies. Yes, there are all sorts of challenges with it being a core to our economy. There's absolutely no question about that, as Sir Paul has framed to you. But the absolute reality is that that space, the relationship between us, our water, our ability to grow the tucker that we put on our table, is going to be one of the most defining spaces across the planet. It's not going to simply play out in a supply way here, but it's going to upset economies, upset societies, cause enormous movements of populations in the decades to come. And in a sense, it's already rolling, which is the Tom Scott cartoon. You might have seen that cartoon as a very simple swipe on the price of milk and crap in the creek. In other words, what dairying is doing to our lowland waterways. It's actually much more subtle than that, and I'm not sure whether Tom really thought that when he put it that way, was the price of food in markets right around the world is a tension point. Most governments attempt to keep the price of food down in real economic terms. Virtually nowhere in the world does the grower, whether it's a small Indian subsistence farmer or a major corporate in America or a dairy farmer here, get the ecological value of whatever the food stuff is that goes on our plate. Every one of us with every bite we're taking, virtually everywhere on the planet, is mining. So we want to worry about mining, look at what you eat. But more importantly, look at what you pay for what you eat. That, in my view, is going to be one of the biggest tensions in democracy, back to Tom Scott's little cartoon. It's this debate about what we should pay, therefore what proportion of our household wealth should we invest in food versus iPhones versus mortgages and so on. Watch this space and think about it big time. So that then takes me to looking forward. Where should we really put our effort? What are the things that we really should focus on? 3 areas. Education. It's really being able to understand that the world we're in and going into is a world that is going to be increasingly more different for us and our ancestors than at any time in the history of humanity. We've got more CO2 in the atmosphere than we've ever had since there were peoples. So that then comes to the sort of things that we grow up to fully understand, and it's this relationship with our ecology that needs to be the core understanding, and we quite frankly don't have it at a large scale. You've got very good things going on within New Zealand and things like enviro schools, but it's much more than that, and it's much more than that in the sense that anybody coming out of a tertiary education institute doing anything, and Mason Jury's alluded to this, needs to be a systems thinker, needs to have as a horizontal language, not a course that you do down in geography or biology or somewhere about ecology and sustainability. No, it's actually how you craft an entire economy, society, values construct within a world that is pushing right up, if not beyond its limits. That is simply not being taught in the tertiary institutions of New Zealand, nor enough in many parts of the world. Enormous failing. No amount of technology is going to dig us out of that hole if we don't understand our relationship. And deeply within that is a whole lot of things about us as people. It's about our leadership, and I'm going to come to that in a second. It's about equity of income and what is work. And I find myself really fascinated in the techno think. I think of steampunk, and I get a bit worried about some of our thoughts about cyberborg, the cyberborg world. And I keep thinking about the absolute efficiencies in biologies as opposed to the things that we can build. And my most efficient individual is a godwit. Just reflect on how much and how efficiently a godwit uses energy to go in a single 7-day flight. Sure as hell beats a 747. Research, second area, knowledge to navigate. Here is where we're really going to have to put the skates on in terms of just 2 areas I'll talk about very briefly is energy, our whole energy profile and our water profile, which is really one about, and we've heard something of that already this morning, efficiencies. In New Zealand, the very smart thing to do is go renewable, decarbonise the grid, and move into a high carbon cost world off a decarbonised grid. On the food front, we're not going to feed the world, never will. Will it lift New Zealand's wealth? I actually think in some spaces it could, and that'll be around areas that are about the efficiency of the soil systems, what you're actually doing in the engine room of food production. And finally, the core thing really is leadership. Empowering the new navigators. That absolutely needs to be part of us building our way to a more secure future. How do we create the institutional arrangements to empower future makers rather than future takers? You're all sitting here because you're future makers or you wish to be future makers. So it's about building institutions that can do the sort of things May's alluded to. Keep a longer term focus. We need to get beyond a 3-year electoral cycle. Absolute must. And you should leave here with, if you had one goal, it would be to take the leadership on that. The second thing, though, is to think about the institutional arrangements that empower the steps that one has to take on long journeys. And many other countries have them. We have very few of these keepers of the long view. For example, 3 years ago, Hungary instituted a parliamentary commissioner for future generations with extraordinary powers within their legislative parliamentary system to look at every piece of legislation and policy in terms of what does it mean for future generations. Are you mining it? Are you building it? Not a bad idea. Wrap up. Good Lord. Observation, obstacle, opportunity was the way Wendy put it. I just thought there that, strike me, we do really well in crises. You've got to say New Zealand came out extraordinarily well in how we responded to a very tragic event in Christchurch. It's been noted worldwide. We really do respond in a way because we've got robust communities and they grow in that time of crisis. So, obstacle, I've got the 3-year parliament and short-termism and failure to recognise the scale of the coming storms. They are just mind-boggling. And climate change, it's not going to be the physical impacts on New Zealand, it's going to be the economic, social, people movement storms that will roll out of the Northern Hemisphere. And finally, opportunity. Where do we look? Turn our shock responses to long-term responses. In other words, take that great empowerment to work together, build consensus, be a community, and think about the strategies and institutions that you need to build behind that. And finally, the thing that really gets at me sometimes, but where I think we really do need to be honest, is get beyond our endless debate about means. We're going to catch up with Australia. We're going to get into the top half of the OECD. That's a means to what ends. Let's talk a lot more about the ends and help us shape a clear vision of where we want to go and how we're going to get there. Thank you.